Three drivers, one title. What has happened to Papaya over the last few races? Hey guys, Jay here, and this is F1 Fantasy Focus. Let's get into it. Hey guys, so bit of a lastminute.com video. I was laying in bed last night when I got a notification from F1.com, and it was regarding Oscar Piastri's interview for the Mexican Grand Prix. And apparently there's a clean slate at McLaren between Piastri and Lando Norris. It said Oscar Piastri has stated that both he and teammate Lando Norris will arrive into the Mexico City Grand Prix weekend on a clean slate, with the repercussions previously given to Norris for contacting Singapore now removed, while Piastri has taken a degree of responsibility for their first lap collision in the Austin Sprint. Piastri was then asked about the repercussions being removed, ones that were previously given to Norris. Piastri continued, yes, the consequences on Lando's side have been removed, and yes, ultimately it was that, part of this being because of what happened in the Austin Sprint. Next, he was asked whether the Papaya rules would have any effect moving forward, to which he replied, not necessarily, no. For us, it's pretty clear what those rules are, which is don't crash into each other, but I think regardless of what scenario you're in, that's how you're expected to race as teammates, so I don't think that adds any pressure into the scenario. Finally, Piastri was asked about the Drivers' Championship now that it's a three-way battle with the surgence of Max Verstappen, to which he replied, the thing that's going to help me to win this championship is trying to get the most out of myself, the most out of the car, the most out of the team around me, and worrying about anyone else on the grid is not focusing on that. He's there, he's in the fight, but ultimately that doesn't change how I'm going to approach my racing. And so this is the current drivers' standings before the Mexican Grand Prix. And you can see Piastri is in first with 346 points. Lando Norris is behind on 332. So he is 14 points behind. And then we've got Max Verstappen in third, 306 points. Max Verstappen 40 points behind Oscar Piastri, and with 5 rounds to go, it is all open for the Drivers' Championship. So what happened? Well, first of all, McLaren dominated the first half of the season, but then out of nowhere, some upgrades came for Red Bull, and they've been working with Max Verstappen claiming victories in Italy, Azerbaijan, and Qatar. But it's not just in F1 that Verstappen is now challenging for top spot. He's also challenging for top spot in F1 Fantasy. So this is the total fantasy points scored. Lando Norris currently leads on 578 points. Oscar Piastri is 18 points behind. And Max Verstappen is third on 530 points. So he's only 48 points behind. And again, with 4 race weekends, remember we've still got 2 sprints as well. Anything is possible. And I could see Max claiming top spot by the end of the season, especially given he's now the favoured 2 times DRS boost driver. He's also only 3 points behind Lando Norris in first on the average fantasy points scored on 27 points. So this got me wondering, in terms of F1 fantasy, what changed? So this is the season average before this week's Grand Prix in Mexico, and you can see it's very, very tight. Norris is first on 30.4. Piastri is second on 29.5 points, and Verstappen is in third with 27.9 points. Now, I say first, second, and third. I've only got these 3 drivers in these screenshots, but that is how close it is between the 3 of them. So what I decided to do was then break it down into different sections of the season. And so, first of all, I went to the first 5 rounds of the season. I've called it the Asian Tour. Obviously, it's got Australia. So we've got Australia, China, Japan, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. And you can see it's kind of close. Norris has got a little bit of an advantage on 39 points average, but then Piastri is only 1.4 ahead of Verstappen because Piastri had that little slip towards the end of the Australian Grand Prix. And so at the start of the season, all things considered, it was pretty close between the top 3. Then we headed to Miami before Europe, and you can see here McLaren was starting to dominate. Piastri on 36.3 average points for these 6 races, Norris on 32.2 points, and Verstappen behind on 19.7. So at this point, Verstappen is almost 17 points behind Piastri in terms of fantasy points on average. Now, Verstappen did have a DNF in Austria, which obviously affects that score, but nonetheless, it was pretty dominant by the 2 McLarens, and obviously in F1 Fantasy, we all had McLaren, and we was either running Piastri or Norris as our 2 times driver. However, things remained the same for Britain, and it remained more or less the same for Belgium and Hungary. But when we got to Italy, things started to change. So this is the second part of the European Tour. So this is this 6. So the average for this is these 6 rounds. And you can see here that Verstappen won these 6 rounds on average fantasy points with 30.3 points. Piastri in second with 27.2 and Norris on 26. So still quite close on average, but the upgrades that Red Bull brought in over the summer were clearly working. And so Verstappen was now challenging again, even though, to be fair, Norris did have a DNF in Zandvoort and Piastri had a DNF in Azerbaijan. But either way, Verstappen was now challenging the 2 McLarens. And then we come to where we're at, which is what I'm calling the American tour. So we've got Singapore, obviously first, which I know is not in America, but we've got Singapore. And then we've got Qatar, Mexico, Brazil, and then Las Vegas. And you can see that after Singapore and Qatar, Verstappen is clearly way ahead. 37.5 average fantasy points, a good 20.5 points ahead of Norris. And then we've got Piastri on 8.5 points. Piastri really struggling in third. The flip over recent weeks between the McLarens and Verstappen has been quite dramatic. And that has led to this three-way battle in F1 for the Drivers' Championship. So what's the problem at McLaren? And this is just my own personal opinion. Obviously, you'll have your own thoughts, but this is just what I personally think as a McLaren fan. So the way I look at it is this: McLaren's already won the Constructors' Championship. So in terms of the team, they've won what they were after. Obviously, they would like that Drivers' Championship for the prestige. But in terms of the team, job done. But in terms of the drivers, I go back to 2 couples, if you will. First of all, I've got Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas when they were both at Mercedes. And the reason this worked, Hamilton, multiple time champion, Bottas was always chasing, but the reason this worked, in my opinion, was simple. You had your attack and you had your defense. Whenever Hamilton was on the attack and was fighting for that championship, Hamilton had Bottas to defend from the people behind, allowing Hamilton to get way ahead without any pressure, and it worked. Whenever Hamilton was leading, more often than not, Bottas would be asked to hold position. And it's the same thing with Red Bull when we had Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen. Again, Max Verstappen would be your attack and Sergio Perez would be your defense. So Verstappen would be on the attack, and then Perez more often than not would get asked to defend. If you go back to Abu Dhabi 21, I think it was, when Perez was holding Hamilton up during that controversial race. But nonetheless, the point is, you had the balance. You had your attacker and you had your defender. So that brings me to the Papaya and McLaren, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. It staggers out. They're both fighting for the championship. This isn't a Hamilton, Bottas or Verstappen, Perez scenario where Hamilton was the only one that could win the title or Verstappen was the only one that could win the title. Both Norris and both Piastri have had a really good chance of winning the title. However, I think that's also the problem, because you can't favour one driver. Now, there's many arguments on who gets favoured. There's arguments that Lando Norris is Zach Brown's boy. There's other arguments that Oscar Piastri gets privileges. I'm not going to say one way or the other who does and who doesn't. I don't care. Things happen. For example, slow pit stops. They've both had slow pit stops. Norris had them in, I think, Italy. Piastri had them recently. They're not deliberate in my opinion. They are what they are. But we have a showdown. We have a showdown of Britain versus Australia. We've got tea and biscuits versus kangaroos and boomerangs. It staggers out. The problem is, it staggers out within the same team. And I think that's the problem, because this allows Max Verstappen to be a sneaky Dutchman and get through the middle and say, thank you very much, boys. I'll take my 5th trophy. And I think that is what's going to happen as things stand. Now, of course, I'm being a bit playful. I'm having a bit of fun with this. I respect all 3 drivers. But as a McLaren fan, of course, I want Lando or Piastri to win. As a Brit, I want Lando to win. But this is my stance. Right now, Max Verstappen is sneaking his way to that 5th title. And the worst thing about it is he doesn't have a defender. His defender is Yuki Tsunoda. Now, could Tsunoda be an outside help? It's unlikely, given Tsunoda's form. He did do well in Kota, but I don't see Tsunoda being high up enough in the grid to be asked to defend. And even if he was, would he be good enough at defending? And I don't think he would. Now, that said, there is another battle ongoing between Mercedes and Ferrari. So there could be possible help from the likes of George Russell, Charles Leclerc, possibly even Lewis Hamilton or Kimi Antonelli, as both Mercedes and Ferrari are not only fighting each other for a second spot in the Constructors' Championship, but Red Bull are close as well. In fact, Red Bull are only 10 points behind Mercedes in second. Now, again, Red Bull only really have Verstappen to rely on in this battle, but the point is, Mercedes and Ferrari aren't going to be worrying about the McLarens and Verstappen. They're going to be worrying about each other, and that, with that said, we could have an inter-battle that affects the Drivers' Championship between Verstappen and the McLarens. You know, if the Mercedes and Ferraris are in between the McLarens and Verstappen, it could affect the championship. So where does this leave me? In short, as a McLaren fan, I don't care who wins the title, whether it be Piastri or Norris. I just want a McLaren driver to win. Preferably Norris because I'm a Brit, but I don't care either way. But honestly, I see Verstappen winning his 5th title right now. McLaren, they need to focus on Verstappen, work together, and then if Verstappen is out of the picture towards the end of the season, then they can fight for the title. Keep it fair, keep it clean, and then go for it. That's it from me, guys. I'm away from Monday to Wednesday, but I'll be back real soon to discuss my plans for the Brazilian Grand Prix. Thank you for watching. All the best, and good luck this weekend. Goodbye.